Shelley, it is really wonderful to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Amir. I'm really very glad to be here with you today.
You have a compelling story. You have come from basically, modest means, if you will, and you have done so much. You've made so many contributions, and of course, right now, you're in a really great position with Procter and Gamble. You've written this book that was just published. I would love to start with just your story, as much of your story as you would like to share with us. That has, what has gotten you to this point in your life and in your career?
It's a big question, right? To say your life story, and so let me do my best with that one, Amir. I think first and foremost, I'm the youngest of 15 siblings, and when I say that, often people pause and say, "Was that 15?" So I'll start by saying to you, yes, it was 15, and it is. So that really is one of the I would call it one of the anchors of my life, as well as one of the more unique aspects of my life. Um, and then from the time that I was 4 years old, my mother was a single mother, and realized I was born in the '60s, so a different time than today. And I was actually born in a neighborhood that was actually fairly predominantly Catholic. So I did know other families that were that were large. I knew families that had 10 children or 11 or 12. But it still was a unique experience that shaped me. I like to say it was the beginnings of my interest in human beings and trying to understand why we do some of the things that we do, as well as just the full range of humanity, that exists. That there's just a full range of human beings that walk this planet, and my learning of that began very young, with so many siblings. So that's where it started. And I grew up in Lakewood, Ohio, which is the first suburb west of Cleveland. As I mentioned, in a predominantly Catholic area, or more specifically, I went to a Catholic school for my first 8 years, and then I went to the public high school. So that would be the first place that I would pause you to say that's one of the things about me that's helped shape who I am.
Got it. And then from a professional perspective, you've had a career in HR. And so what attracted you to that? And I know you kind of alluded to that. You became really interested in humans, but there was something that professionally sort of attracted you to that field. Can you talk to us about your professional experience?
Sure. So I have been an HR professional for about 30 years. And I guess what I'd say to you is my educational background is in organizational behavior, and then I have a master's degree in organizational development, which is really about transformation. So the field of OD is about transformation. The first place and moment that I became interested in this field, I took an organizational psychology class at the University of Michigan, where I got my undergrad degree, and that class changed the trajectory of my life, because I read about this field called organization development, and it was described very simply as really a values-based. It's really about helping individuals and organizations transform from a values-based and a human-based anchor. That's how I would say it. And so I took this class and I read it and I said, this is what I want to do. Like, this is the first description that I've ever read that tells me what I want to do. I do want to help organizations. I was drawn to the field of business because I do love the idea of producing results. I do love the idea of producing something tangible in a fast-paced environment. And I was very drawn to humanity. As I mentioned, as the youngest of 15, I was always watching the patterns of what human beings did and why and how, and what some of my siblings did and why they had good consequences or bad. And then when I took this class at Michigan, it was the first time I was like, oh, this would be a really cool field. I get to really assess or look across an organization and help identify those things that can make organizations, communities, or companies more human and more productive. And that just really, really drew me in. I started my career at P&G in 1985 in the sales function. And that was actually a really good fit for me right out of college, because you can see I love to talk. The art of persuasive communication became one that I was very comfortable with, and I developed some of those skills in college. And I like the idea of fast paced and sort of moving and delivering results. So I started in sales. And then after about 4 years at P&G, I started my master's program. And my master's is in organization development. And I got that at, I earned that at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland. And that was where for 2 years I worked at P&G and I was getting my master's on weekends, on days that I took for vacation. And I really got deeply immersed in really the science and the technology of change. And it really excited me and it really energized me. And it wasn't until the mid 90s that the field of HR, at least from my vantage point, the field of HR began to move into more of a transformational function or role, right? And that continued in through the 2000s. But HR for many years was more transaction oriented, policy, all wonderful and important things. And my training and some of my orientation was around transformation. So I moved into HR at P&G and started doing that work. And the way I transitioned into that was I began to lead change projects in the sales function, and really helping to drive change and doing work that helped individuals, teams, and organizations become something better, become something different, because it was right for the business and it was right for the people. And that really excited me. So that's a bit my transition from college to sales into HR. And then, decades go by, Amir, and you just don't know what happened, but you wake up and decades have gone by.
Hey, look, I know exactly what you mean. I look back on my journey. I just want to kind of point out very quickly that our journeys have we have a little bit in common, in that I started with Procter Gamble in 1985 as well, and I was in manufacturing. So I have a master's in mechanical engineering, but you know as well as I do, like when you have this calling, it's like it's always kind of gnawing at you. It's like, okay, pull you this way, and like you, for me initially, it wasn't like, I wasn't really in HR, but I always had this interest in people. And ultimately, I mean, I spent 31 years in manufacturing and supply chain, but I was always doing it from an angle of sort of how can I make things a little better for people and things like that. And it seems like we've had a similar type of journey in that sense.
That's really cool. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
That's really, really fascinating. Yeah, it is. It's about the and, right? I
Yes.
mean, throughout my career, what I've learned and what I've driven is it can be about the and. And the and is when it's powerful. It can be about growing the business. It needs to be about growing the business. And it can enrich human beings' lives, and it can help and grow and develop. Matter of fact, that's the perfect intersection, right? Because
Yeah.
we know, and you and I have a shared history in the same company, that we believe deeply in, that the development of individuals and the development of the business are, inextricably connected and necessary. And so that's really cool. I would also say that, this journey of change, and I've really built myself over the years as a transformational change leader. I had the privilege, and I mean this, the privilege and the honor to work with so many amazing executives at P&G that I learned from, that I learned with, and we did some really cool things. We shifted organizations to anchor the beauty business in the place and in the space that was good for the beauty business. I led a shutdown of a site where there were 800 employees there, and we found a way to do this that was very human, that was very respectful, that provided time, options, and support. And those three themes became the anchors that I used in how we managed that shutdown and that transition. And it was just fabulous. I've had the privilege of driving most recently some transformation in our talent systems to ensure that we are building a pipeline of talent that's both outstanding and diverse. And then I've been driving change in the diversity, equality, and inclusion space really throughout my career. And again, I've had the privilege of learning from some incredible change leaders along that path. And as you know, I'm now in the role that's the dream of a lifetime for me. So a year and a half ago, I moved into the role of Chief Diversity Officer at P&G. We now call, my title is now Chief Equality and Inclusion Officer. But it's
Mhm.
just it's the dream of a lifetime to work with colleagues
Yeah.
around the world to enable P&G to drive equality, because it's what makes sense for growth.
Absolutely. And so really, I mean, congratulations on not just the success that you've had, but really pursuing your calling and getting that fulfillment, as well as, making significant contributions along the way. So that's really fantastic, Shelley.
Thank you.
And now you just had a book published. So
I
how
did.
did that come about? How did how was the book born, if you will?
Yeah. So, I mentioned this big family, right? And one of the things that I started to do when I was a child is to have a journal and to begin to capture hopes, fears, wishes, and that commitment to put words on paper has continued throughout my life.
Mm,
I had a profound shift when I was 16,
mhm,
and the profound shift was that we had a close family friend pass away unexpectedly and in a tragic accident. So my sister's best friend, Marianne, who was a close friend of our family, died in a tragic accident. And I wrote my first poem. Amir, I
mm,
didn't know that I had poetry sitting in there. And I wrote my first poem, and it was a way for me to process pain. It was a
mm.
way for me to process grief. And,
Yeah.
I came from this big Irish Catholic family. We knew laughter very well. That was very comfortable space for us. What wasn't as comfortable a space for us was painful pain. And so when I had this event happen, and we all did, I moved to pick up the pen and to write. And that really started me on the course of writing poetry that helped me process my own experiences, what I witnessed in the world around me, or what I felt deeply, really, in the end. And so I started writing poetry, and over many years, probably about 10 years ago, what I did is said to myself, "Wow, I have this poetry in all these different journals. I need to start bringing it together and looking at the patterns. Like, what is in here?" Because I had a knowing, I had an instinct that those words were meant for a broader audience. And so that was the start of it, I would say, of this. I would call, coming to the place of actually writing a book.
That's awesome. And so no blanks, no pauses. What does that mean to you? Can you talk about the title of your book?
Yeah. So no blanks, no pauses really reflects a moment in time, as well as a recurrent moment for people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community.
Mhm.
And so what happened is, and this is the story of no blanks, no pauses. In 2005, at the age of 86, my mother-in-law, Alice, introduced me as her daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
And it was a really important moment. I am a wife. I am a mother. My wife, Cindy, and I have been married since 2014. We've been together for 37 years.
Mm.
So I talked to you about my family of origin, but now I'd like to reference some things about my family of choice and my
Yeah.
family that I created. So my wife Cindy and I again have a long relationship of 37 years. Again, those decades go by fast, don't they?
Yeah.
Um, but we met at the University of Michigan, and in 2005, when my mother-in-law Alice introduced me as her daughter-in-law, that wasn't legally accurate. It reflected, and what she reflected was the depth of her love for me and her connection to me, because I
Mm.
had been in her family and in her daughter's family for a very long time. In fact, Cindy and I have 3 daughters together. So our oldest daughter, Allie, is now 23. She was born in 1997. And then we have twins, Kate and Nicole, and they were born in 2000. And so in that moment, what I experienced from Alice is something I had never experienced before with any other human being. And it was that there were no blanks and no pauses. And what I was used to, and what many of us in the community of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals, what we experience often is that silence. When when I introduce my wife and our 3 daughters, and the person on the other side of that has a blank look because they're just not quite sure how to react or what to say, or they have a level of discomfort that's so deep for them, or in somewhere in their being, they view us as not equal to, or not normal in some way. And so it may be that, or it may be just a surprise to them, but that reaction of a blank. And then the pause is one that I've done. And again, we're all human here on this journey, so I don't say these things to criticize. On my side, the pause was common, where I would be in an environment or a place. And for so many years, as I got comfortable with me and who I am and that part of my identity, I wasn't always forthcoming in introducing Cindy or our relationship for what it was or for who she was. And so there is this thing, right? No blanks, no pauses. It represents, it's an empty space that has caused me great pain over the years, the decades, right? Sometimes it gnawed away at my sense of belonging. Sometimes it had me internalize shame, or it distanced me from others. And I wanted to reclaim that. And I wanted to find a way to honor my mother-in-law, because it was such a special moment. And what it represents is the importance. It represents what all human beings want. So you say, okay, there's the empty space. What do you want? We all want to be seen for who we are. We want to be respected, and we want to be valued. And that requires no blanks, no pauses.
Really a very powerful idea. You know, for me, having grown up in Iran, and, you know, I came to the States when I was 16 years old. I've been married also for over 39 years to my wife, who is of a different race. We're an interracial couple. She's Black, you know, I'm Iranian, and we've lived in Thailand, in Germany, and all this. And I in all of those situations, you know, I've witnessed, experienced, perhaps committed some of these same things myself. Is like, look, there are those awkward moments where you don't know what to say and how to act and so on and so forth. And I think what you're talking about is so important for us to kind of get in touch with our own moments of blanks and pauses to figure out, okay, what can I do differently, and where is this coming from, right?
Yes. Yes, and it really asks us and challenges us as humans to reflect on what is in our subconscious, right? That we may not even be aware of, right? What are those unconscious beliefs and biases we have that, because they reside there, they keep us distant from other human beings, right? They create a divide that doesn't need to be there. And so in my book, what I do in my book, No Blanks, No Pauses, is I share poetry and then I tell stories. And it's a memoir as well as a book of poetry. And it's a memoir because I share stories and instances in my life where I've learned some of my greatest life lessons and some of my most important insights that I've gained through some of those experiences. What I found about the poetry is, because the other thing I started doing about 10 years ago is I began to build those poems into stories. And I started building those stories. I was gathering them in my home office, not knowing what I would exactly do with them. And one day, someone from the P&G LGBTQ community said, we'd like for you to give a speech on being in a family and being in an LGBTQ family. Do you mind writing that speech and giving it? And I said, I looked at this guy and I said, I actually already have it written. It wasn't fully written, but it was pretty close to being done. And so I started taking the poetry and the stories and building talks and speeches. And I began giving those speeches inside and outside of P&G, telling some of my life story as a mechanism, as a way to open more hearts and open more minds, so that as we as human beings can build more connection and less divide. Like, that was really my goal. I also have used my storytelling around the world in P&G to engage senior executives of P&G around the world to help them understand, what does it look like to be more inclusive? What does it look like in terms of behavior? What does it look like in terms of language? And then also to create a level of support network for people who have felt marginalized, including people in the LGBTQ community. So I've helped accelerate the expansion of our affinity teams around the world in many locations, so that everyone at P&G can feel valued and supported for who they are. Then they contribute their best. And that's why it's important.
Yeah, and what a great fit again between your sort of background and your passion and the role that you're in, and it's all in the book that you've written and the stories and the talks. It's all coming together. And I guess maybe I'll ask you this question. As you're working with a global company and you work with people in different regions, I wonder if you can share. I know there's some things that are very specific to certain cultures, certain challenges and certain opportunities and things like that. But there is kind of a universal theme to this whole thing around how we could be more inclusive and that. I mean, would you agree? I mean, what are some of these thoughts that you would share that span, they're timeless and universal?
Yeah, my book is actually about humanity, right?
Yeah.
It's about the struggles of humanity and the joy of humanity when we come together. So some of the themes that I bring to life in this book are things like the power of forgiveness. So a story that I share in the book, and it's the title of that particular chapter is called Regret and Redemption. But I tell the story of a moment in time when I was 4 years old, and it was the last moment that my father came to visit our home before he left and moved out. And so what I would say to you is my book is about universal themes and it's about humanity. And what I do is I tell the story of my father, who did live a lifetime of regret because alcoholism was his sickness, and it's not one that he ever came to terms with or was able to overcome in any way. And as a result of that, he missed me and he missed my siblings. So I never really knew my father. But in the book, I talk about the story of when he left, but I also tell the story of when he died, and right before he died, when we were reunited. And I talk about that experience of what does it feel like to forgive someone you never knew? What does it feel like to make the choice to not live from a place of anger or resentment? And so what I can say is that I walked through that journey of forgiving my father. And by the time he did pass away, I didn't carry anger with me. I didn't carry resentment. And I made a commitment to not carry forward that anger because I didn't want to live a life of anger or a life of resentment. And so that's one of the themes that I talk about is the importance of forgiveness. I talk about the power of healing. Again, a universal human need and theme. But what I find is that when you do your own healing work, when you heal from the wounds, that's one of the ways to not only help you have a better and more full life, but it prevents you from passing along that pain, right?
Yes.
As humans, we all experience pain, right? We do. The question is, do we heal through it? Do we try to avoid it? And I have found that there's just much more peace in working through doing the work of healing. I also, one other theme I'd bring out is I do tell a story of bullying, right? That I share a story where one of our daughters was bullied, and the lack of understanding or the lessons of either hate or judgment that she learned that then came out, right? She learned either in her home or in her environment, or that came out as a way to punish one of our children, punish my daughter. And so I also talk about that just as another universal theme is that we all have the ability to heal. We also have the ability to rise above things like regret, like maybe the trigger to do something bad or mean or hateful, if we do our own work. And I think those are some of the human themes. I also have some organizational themes, but those are a couple that are important to me, and that come out in the book.
Yeah, and these are so foundational, right? I mean, from my own experience, all of the ones that you just mentioned are things that, they may be expressed differently in different parts of the world. but the theme is there, and it just, and on this podcast we talk a lot about leadership and culture and stuff, and it always kind of comes down to the individual. Culture transformation has to start with personal transformation. Like, let me get in touch with what's going on with me, and that sort of thing. So I think it's really, really great. But you also mentioned some organizational themes. So what are a couple of examples of those?
Yes. So we have a responsibility as leaders to do a few things. First is, I would say this, the best leaders that I've worked with over many years care deeply about human beings, and they make sure that no one is treated as less than.
Yes.
So one of my poems is really anchored in the concept of less than. We know when someone's interacting with us in a way that they view us, they see us, and they believe they can treat us as less than. And I just believe there is no room for less than, particularly for leaders. And so one of my calls to action for leaders is, don't treat anyone as less than. And it starts with knowing that when people are forced to sit along the edges, right, outside of that range of access to information or access to key roles, we're missing the power and the contribution that they can have. We miss their wisdom, we miss relationships, and we miss the impact they can have on the organization. So great leaders include, great leaders respect, great leaders make sure that no one is ever treated as less than. And that requires work, right? It requires work because we have to reflect on our own biases. We all have them. We are all biased. We all have these roadmaps in our brain that have been built over time. They've been built unconsciously, primarily, and they sit there and they form into a set of beliefs and how we interact with the world. And so you have to get in touch with what are the biases you have or the beliefs that you have that create distance between you and another. And you have to find a way to bridge that gap, or you will never develop all of your talent. You will never give everybody the opportunity to be successful. You will never give everybody the opportunity to thrive and to give the best to your corporation. So I think that's one of the greatest callings of leadership is you've been given these assets of human beings. Respect them, value, nurture. And the word inclusion, right, is about belonging. Inclusion is a feeling, right? It's the feeling of belonging. And what I know, Amir, is when I feel like I belong, I can give my best. Mm-hmm. When I feel like I'm not quite as good, or I am maybe not as deserving, or maybe someone judges me harshly, it depletes my energy. It depletes my capacity to give and to contribute. So that's, for me, one of the greatest lessons of leadership that I'm still learning, and we're all learning, really.
Yeah, that's great. And I have to tell you, I love this word belonging, because to me, it was like it seems like it's such an important part of any sort of equality and inclusion work, because ultimately it's like, okay, so we have diversity, we attempt to treat people as equals and include them, but ultimately, does that manifest in them feeling like they belong, they can be themselves, and it's such a powerful thing when that happens.
I would add, yes, I love the way you said that. So when I think about what we're focused on at P&G in the employee space, there's three broad objectives we have. One is we want to reflect the billions of consumers that we serve. It's really important to us because, we serve consumers in more than, around the world. So billions of consumers. The only way we drive the innovation for those consumers is to be diverse. So reflect is one of those. Mm-hmm. The other one is around feeling. We want people to feel like they belong. So we want them to be reflected. We want them to feel, and then we want all of our employees to have access and opportunity to succeed, feel encouraged, feel supported, and all of that takes work. It doesn't just happen, on its own. We've had to do systemic work and cultural work to make that commitment come true. But it's an important one, and it's a necessary one.
Yeah. That's really great. And you've referred to this doing the work a few times. And I totally believe it. I mean, this is not going to happen by accident. You got to be intentional about doing the work. And I know that, like, really reading your book is one of those steps that says, okay, let me just kind of, maybe I don't even know what I don't know, but let me just sort of go through this process of reading some of this poetry and some of these stories and see what it stirs up in me and what it makes me aware of. But if in the absence of that, or before somebody picks up your book, if I were to say, okay, so if I'm a person who really wants to be more inclusive, and I know I have my own biases, but I want to do better, what would you recommend in terms of kind of getting started with the work?
So there is something that everybody can find online, and it's called the Implicit Association Test, or the IAT.
Mhm.
It's a mind opener if you've never done it before, because what you learn by going through that is that we are all biased, and we all have things that are happening on the unconscious that are triggering what we say, how we behave, what we do. It influences our mindset and our behaviors, those biases. So I think that's one of the first and most important piece of work that someone could do today listening. They could go online and access the IAT that comes out of Harvard, and it's a terrific tool. And Mahzarine Banaji is a colleague and a friend of mine who is the author of that work with some of her colleagues. So that would be one thing I'd say. The second thing that I'd say is build relationships with people who are different than you. Listen to their stories. Listen to where they came from, the moments in their lives that have helped shape who they are. I think the ability to build empathy and connection, we've lost a bit of that with all of this technology that we rely on, right? And so what's happened is, we hear, we let things like social media and what we read online start to build the narratives in our heads about people. And they become a really bad replacement for relationships. And that's one of the concerning things, right? Because, there are narratives out there that don't paint some of the communities that I'm a part in a very positive way. And it's true for many others. And so that's what I would say is relationships, is get to know and build relationship with someone who is different than you. And then third is just commit to a learning journey. I mean, I am constantly learning, right? I have been in this space of diversity, equality, inclusion for many, many years. And like many that I know, my understanding of racism and its impact on this country and its impact on the lives of all Americans, and the deep impact on Black and Brown Americans has been profound. And my learning has just accelerated to a whole new level because of what's happened over the past many months, where we were confronted with visuals and with facts that were undeniable. And it wasn't that I didn't believe those facts before, but it was that I made a commitment to deepen my knowledge and my understanding, because I said to myself, there is always more for me to learn. And as a result of that, I am a better person, and I am taking more distinct action. So it's kind of a long answer for your question. I have so much passion for this space.
No, and I appreciate your passion. I think that's really a great answer. I reflect on some of my own experiences around, like when I was going to Thailand, everybody was like, look, this culture is very different, and so on and so forth. And of course, Procter & Gamble did a great job of putting us through like a week of culture training and so on and so forth. But there was still this daunting task of how do I communicate? And then I decided, it was a moment where I decided, I said, look, I'm not going to be overwhelmed by this. I'm simply going to build relationships with one person at a time. Yes. I'm not going to go, yes, there are books, there was actually a book, How to Work with the Ties. Okay. And I'm sure there's benefit in that. And it's like, okay, don't put your foot on the table and stuff like that. I mean, that is just offensive to every Thai person, right, and perhaps some non-Thai person. But at the end of the day, it's about building relationships and getting to truly know that person and helping them, or being open for them to know you.
Absolutely. And, none of us wants to be a label, right? None of us wants to be a label. Matter of fact, Amir, I don't know if you remember this, but you asked me if I wanted to read anything from my book, and I was going to read one.
I'd love it. Yeah, please.
My poems, if you're okay with that.
I would love it. Yeah, please do that.
And one of these, this poem is titled Labels. And I start by saying, none of us wants to be a label. We want to be a human being, right? One of the things that happen at work, sometimes I'll be in a room and someone might say, oh, HR's in the room. And I would stop and I would say, no, Shelly is in the room. I'd look and go, where is HR? I'm Shelly. right? So none of us are a label. We have a range of identities, but we're not a label. Labels. We limit with our labels. We assume who people are and what they like to do. We overvalue the what. We undervalue the who. We miss the gifts given to each. We miss the purpose and path each came to pursue. What will it take to meet, connect, and discover who you are, who we are, who we can be together? I believe we can be very powerful together.
Wow, that's beautiful. That is really beautiful. Awesome, Shelly. And as we wrap this conversation up, I think that was a really wonderful piece to share. Again, I would recommend, we're going to put your links in the podcast notes, and I would recommend that folks pick up your book and follow you and learn more from you. But the spirit of what you're bringing is so timely, so relevant, and it's always been needed, but it's the need for this message is even greater, or felt even more great. It is felt all over the world, I think.
Yeah.
So it's really fantastic work.
It's been a rough 2020 was a rough year, right? And
Yes.
On many fronts. And I think anything that we can each do to bring more compassion, more empathy, more connection and love to the world is a good thing. And if I were to close on any thought for you today, Amir, it would be that the encouragement of all of us to do our work. And I say all of us. I wrote a book. I don't have all the answers. I shared my reflections and my perspective and a bit of the challenges that I see in front of us. So I just really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak today. It's been a joy to talk with you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And so, Shelly, we know we're going to put things in the links in the podcast notes, but if you don't mind, just tell our listeners as well, what is the best way to find out more about what you're doing and, get a hold of your book, things like that?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. So I have a ShellyMcNamara.com. You will find a website that I have, and it'll tell you more about where to find my book, and you'll also see some excerpts of my writing.
Fantastic. And I've actually really enjoyed your website. Great story, many contributions to the world, and I wish you all the best. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Transformative Leader podcast.
Thank you for what you're doing, Amir.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.